Andre hears it before he feels it, a low metallic knock coming from somewhere under the hood, right as he merges onto the highway for his overnight shift. His stomach drops the way it always does, the automatic full-body brace he's had since he was 22 and a blown transmission ate an entire paycheck he didn't have. He waits for the familiar spiral to start. The math of which bill gets skipped this month, the calls to his brother, the dread of walking into work and asking for an advance again, the whole rehearsed script of panic his body knows by heart at this point. Instead, he just pulls into the gas station up ahead, puts the car in park, and calls the shop 3 exits down. Calm. Almost bored, if he's honest with himself. He sits there for a second afterward, genuinely confused by his own reaction, because the version of him that existed 8 months ago would already be panicking in this exact parking lot, phone shaking in his hand. Something changed for Andre in the last 8 months that has nothing to do with his car, and it started with a number so small most people don't even think of it as a milestone. Here's the assumption baked into almost every finance video you've ever watched, including some of ours, that the milestones worth talking about start at 5 figures, 10,000, 50,000, 100,000, if the creator's feeling ambitious. $1,000 gets treated like a rounding error, something you blow past on a good week without noticing. That assumption isn't just wrong for a huge number of people, it's backwards. Hello everyone, I'm Liam. This channel is about breaking down exactly what your money is actually doing to you, using real numbers instead of vague advice. And if you want the version of these breakdowns that actually starts where most people are, instead of where finance influencers wish they were, subscribing means you won't miss the next one. Quick disclaimer. I'm not a financial advisor. This isn't personalized financial advice. This is an educational breakdown using a specific illustrative example. So here's the actual claim. For someone living paycheck to paycheck, the jump from $0 to $1,000 saved changes daily life more than the jump from $10,000 to $50,000 does for almost anyone else. Not because the number is big, because of what it's specifically capable of stopping. And what it's capable of stopping is exactly what Andre's car was about to test. A seatbelt doesn't prevent the crash. Nothing about wearing one changes whether the other driver runs the red light, whether the road ices over, whether the truck in front of you slams its brakes. The crash still happens exactly the way it was always going to happen. What the seatbelt changes is what happens to you during it, whether you walk away shaken, or whether the same exact impact becomes something you don't recover from. That's the entire function of $1,000 sitting in an account you don't touch. It doesn't stop the car from breaking down. It doesn't stop the shift getting cut, the rent going up, the kid getting sick right when you can least afford it. The crash still happens, every time. What changes is whether that crash turns into one bad week, or whether it turns into a payday loan, a missed rent payment, a slide that takes months to climb back out of. Back to Andre. 8 months ago, a knock like that under the hood wasn't a seatbelt moment. It was the crash itself, full force, nothing between him and whatever came next. Sitting in that gas station parking lot now, waiting for the mechanic to answer, he wasn't thinking about seatbelts either. He was just doing something he genuinely hadn't done. The last 3 times this happened, he was breathing normally. And what actually put that seatbelt in place for him is a lot more ordinary than you'd expect, which is exactly the point. Let's ground this in real numbers. Because the $1,000 line isn't arbitrary, researchers actually track it specifically. According to a Primerica survey conducted in March, 64% of Americans reported having an emergency fund of at least $1,000, up from 58% just 2 years earlier. That 6-point jump matters, but look at what it implies in reverse. More than a third of the country is still on the wrong side of that exact line, meaning over a third of people are one bad week away from a full-blown crisis instead of an inconvenience. Here's the part that explains why this specific number, rather than some bigger round figure, functions as a real dividing line. Most financial emergencies that actually derail people aren't enormous. A car repair, a broken appliance, a missed shift's worth of pay. The Federal Reserve has found that 36% of Americans would struggle to cover an unexpected $400 expense, not $10,000. $400, which means the gap between disaster and inconvenience for a huge share of the population is sitting almost exactly where $1,000 in savings would cover it. This isn't a wealth-building number, it's a shock absorption number, and those are two completely different jobs that most advice mashes together as if they're the same thing. And once that shock absorber is actually in place, something happens that has nothing to do with money at all, which is exactly what Andre was experiencing without having language for it yet. Here's how Andre actually got there, because the math is almost aggressively simple. He started setting aside $35 a week, not from a raise, not from cutting something dramatic, just from switching his phone plan and packing lunch 3 days instead of 0. At $35 a week, hitting $1,000 takes right around 29 weeks, a little over 6.5 months. No investment growth required, no market timing, no clever trick. Just $35 a week, left alone, 29 times in a row. Compare that to the $10,000 milestone the algorithm loves talking about. At that same $35 a week, $10,000 takes just under 5.5 years. The math isn't wrong to focus on the bigger number. Eventually, it's wrong to treat the smaller one as not worth a video, because the smaller one is doing a completely different, arguably more urgent job for a completely different group of people. Andre hit his $1,000 mark in month 7. He didn't throw a party. He barely noticed the exact week it happened, because $35 a week doesn't feel like an event, it feels like nothing. Right up until the week your car makes a noise it's never made before. And the week that noise finally showed up is exactly the week you already watched happen at the start of this video. Now here's where the research gets almost strange, because the psychological effect of this number is disproportionately large compared to its size. According to Vanguard's 2025 research on emergency savings, people with at least $2,000 set aside reported a 21% increase in financial well-being compared to people with none, and even the initial $1,000 layer captures a meaningful chunk of that effect on its own. The same research found that investors with no emergency savings spent an average of 7.3 hours a week thinking about and dealing with their finances. Investors with at least $2,000 saved 3.7 hours, less than half. Read that again, because it's not saying money problems disappeared. It's saying the mental bandwidth spent worrying about money nearly cut in half from a buffer that, for most households, represents a few months of modest, boring effort. That's not a coincidence. That's the seatbelt doing its actual job, not preventing every bad thing, but freeing up the part of your brain that used to sit there bracing for one. This is where most people assume the story ends, but what it changes about how someone shows up at work is honestly the stranger part. Here's what actually shifts once that buffer exists. Beyond the hours saved worrying, it changes how you handle a bad shift, because a bad shift stops being a crisis multiplier. It changes how you talk to your kid about money, because "we can't" gets replaced, at least sometimes, with an actual pause to think instead of an automatic reflex. It changes small, almost invisible daily decisions, whether you buy the slightly better tires, whether you take the sick day you actually need instead of pushing through, whether you say something at work you wouldn't have risked saying while one bad week from disaster. None of this means life gets easy. Andre is still working overnight shifts. He's still budgeting carefully, still saying no to things he wants, still tired in the specific way that never fully goes away on this kind of schedule. What's different is the flaw underneath all of it, the fact that one bad week no longer threatens to become 3 bad months, which turns out to be the difference between surviving a hard year and drowning in one. I want to be honest about something, because skipping it would make this dishonest. Even $35 a week isn't available to everyone, and pretending it's a universal solution ignores a lot of real situations. If your income is already fully consumed by rent, food, And the basics, there's no phone plan to downgrade and no lunch to pack differently because there's no slack left to redirect in the first place. That's not a failure of effort. It's math, shaped by wages and costs that individual willpower doesn't control. But here's the reframe worth sitting with regardless. This was never really about $1,000 as a magic number. It's about the fact that the first dollars saved do disproportionately more work than the dollars that come after them, because they're the ones standing directly between you and the most common, most mundane emergencies that actually happen, the ones that show up on an ordinary Tuesday, not the dramatic ones finance content likes to dramatize. A bigger cushion is better, obviously. But the first 1,000 isn't a smaller, less impressive version of a bigger goal. It's arguably doing the single most important job any of your money will ever do. Now, let's go back to that gas station, because the mechanic finally picked up. "Yeah, bring it in," the mechanic says. And Andre can already tell from his tone it's not going to be cheap. A knock like that usually means the timing chain. And timing chains aren't an $80 fix. He thanks him, hangs up, and just sits there for a second in the parking lot, waiting for the old panic to catch up with him the way it always used to. It doesn't come. Not because he's not worried, he is a little. The normal amount a $600 repair should make anyone worried. But underneath that worry, for the first time in a car trouble moment like this, there's a flaw. He has it. Not comfortably, not without noticing, but he has it, and having it changes the entire shape of the next 10 minutes compared to every other time this exact scenario played out. He calls his manager, explains he'll be a few hours late, and instead of the shaking apology he's given before, his voice comes out steady. He's not asking for mercy. He's just stating a fact and moving on with his day. It was never about the $1,000. It was about the version of him that got to stay calm because of it.